walk with those seeking truth, run from those who say they found it.
So I was scrolling through LinkedIn earlier this week, and LinkedIn is kind of it's kind of the final frontier of social media. And at least the people that I'm connected with, and especially my coworkers at my real job, remember, I do have a real career, which the topics that I talk about here have nothing to do with that company, and they're all my own. But I do have that real job, but I do have a lot of connections, fairly good amount of connections, and usually it is strictly business. Almost all the time, it's strictly business. And even in today's day and age, it has usually been strictly business. So posts about business and what they're doing, even businesses talking about COVID-19 and what they're doing. Especially the healthcare groups talking about their groups or their employees and talking about what they're doing to help patients, etc. But also companies like mine that are talking about technology. A lot of companies are going to working from home, and they of course need different ways of doing that because maybe some companies weren't prepared to do that. But I came across a post on LinkedIn that I think it was back, from July 4th. So, it's just another one of these newsfeed algorithms that took me to a later post, but had quite a bit of reactions, and it was basically a picture of the Declaration of Independence. And this was a CEO, I forget the company name, and he posted something about the time frame back in the 1700s, and he talked about the people who signed it, and it was meant to be a positive, uplifting sort of post where he talked about the founding of the country. And I saw that there were, I think, around 94 comments. And it's just that same kind of gut reaction you get now on Facebook or on Twitter. And you see that many comments on a post like that. And given the what's going on in the country with COVID-19 and the shutdowns and the quarantines and the George Floyd and the protests and all these things, I thought, no, surely not on LinkedIn, right? But no, when I opened the comments, it was what you see in the country now. So it was, you can call it right and left, Republican, Democrat, whatever you want to call it, but it was a lot of people instantly talking about how the folks that were mentioned that signed the Declaration of Independence and how many slaves they owned. And then there were people talking about why that's relevant in today's society and what that has to do with the intentions of the post itself. And, it became a debate about basically what everything else is turning into these days, a debate about inequality among races and inequality among the dispossessed or the oppressed and the oppressors. And it was just sad to see on LinkedIn something like that. Because usually on LinkedIn, if not just for the sake of being careful, because this is a place where you are you are representing your employer in most cases, or if you're unemployed, you're trying to get a job. And unfortunately, in this case, that didn't stop anybody. And I didn't take the time to look to see what companies people worked for, that sort of thing. But that's the sort of thing that this day and age, people screenshot that. I mean, you never know, but people still had, I don't know if you'd say the guts or the lack of the guts, I don't know, to say exactly what they were feeling. And it was this huge divide that you could see represented on LinkedIn of all places. And let's talk about that for just a second. And again, I'm trying to make sense of this myself. So I want everyone to think about this, because I'll point to this a little later, in that a lot of the people I've ended up kind of following and paying attention to, not a lot of them, but I think a surprisingly high amount are evolutionary biologists. And you'll hear them talk about when they say, quote unquote, a long time, they're talking about like 1,000 years minimum, usually, something like that. And because they're talking about evolution and kind of how human beings of any shape, size, color, or background, how they evolved from thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, to what we are today. And how are those things coded kind of in our DNA, in our behavior, and also how that relates to other mammals and other animals, how that's coded. So the reason I bring that up is because when we're looking at something like the Declaration of Independence and, the people that signed it and kind of that era, that time where, I think most of us know what that time represented. You had a group of people that were fighting for their independence from a group of, or from a monarch in Britain. But of course, yes, that era, many, many white people owned slaves. And that's a fact of history. My question, I guess, is can we really look at those times through the lens of 2020? Because you can look at most eras that are 200, 300, 400, 500 years, 1,000 years old. And can't you always look through today's lens and say, wow, the atrocities of this time are so awful that if those folks existed today, obviously, they would be considered the most reprehensible individuals ever to live. And you'd want them, rounded up and put in jail and or executed. And I'm talking about, so for instance, if you haven't watched the show Outlander, first of all, it's just a good show. But second of all, for me, what surprised me the most is their willingness to kind of, and they wove this theme into, the writing on the show and the purpose of the show. But it was basically the atrocities of, I think it was the 1600s, and just the general carnal nature about how men looked at women. I mean, just take that interaction alone, and there were basically these civilized men that women could come across and not fear for their safety, fear to be captured, fear to be raped. They were actually few and far between. Most men, if you weren't, and this is why women at that time, had to be married after, when they were, 16 to 18, because if they were single and in adulthood and they didn't still live at home, they had no shot. They couldn't just roam the countryside and go about their day, and they couldn't get jobs. None of that. I mean, the ones who were really smart were viewed as witches, and just certain advancements in even medical technology could put you in danger of being burned at the stake because you're a witch. And of course, looking at those times through the lens of today, you would say that you cannot celebrate any men of that time. All men of that time were evil oppressors, and none of them can be celebrated. And, if they lived today, you would consider them the most reprehensible people on the face of the planet. And I guess my point is, haven't we made any progress since these times? Haven't we made any progress since the 1700s, since the 1600s, since 1920s, since the 1960s? Surely we've made some progress, right? Is our goal some perfect utopia where everyone gets along, everyone's treated equally, everyone has equal opportunity, and there's equal outcomes for everybody? Is that truly our goal? That kind of perfect utopia? Because I question if that's ever even possible. Will everybody always be equal? Or ever be equal? Is that even possible? Can we eradicate all people that are racist and totally abolish racism and inequality and people that seek to oppress others because they feel they are better than them? Is it possible to get rid of all these people and all these thoughts? I don't know. From the people that I follow and pay attention to, it's not possible. And if you can't have a discussion with that, if I'm instantly part of the oppressors and part of the racists or part of the white supremacists or the Nazis, just because I say that perfect utopia society is unattainable, then, and you're not willing to listen to what I had to say next, then I think you're part of the problem. Because I would tend to think that perfect utopian society is certainly not possible, but it doesn't mean we can't get better. It doesn't mean we don't have room to improve. Having room to improve is different than never having changed in the first place. And I think that's a very important distinction.